This is Extra Paycheck Podcast, episode number 89.
You're listening to Extra Paycheck Podcast, where you will learn how to build and grow your own successful online business. Now, here's your host, Alex Soul.
Welcome to yet another episode of the Extra Paycheck Podcast. This is episode number 89. And today I've got a very special guest for you. His name is Sam Poirier. He is a local entrepreneur from Montreal. And at his young age, he has built quite a few impressive companies. Today he will be talking about his newest venture, a company that's only 2.5 years old. It's called Retinad. And they specialize in virtual reality analytics. A really great story, so make sure to pay attention to this episode. Enjoy it. Hey Sam, and welcome to the Extra Paycheck Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Sam, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and what is that you do for a business.
So basically I've been an entrepreneur since I was probably something like 14 years old, and I've just always been really fascinated by the potential impact from private organizations. And I just think that very often they're the most efficient way to organize humans to accomplish goals. So whenever I have a goal in mind, be it in any market, I try to build a company around it. And I've been building companies in natural resources. I've done one in Bitcoin. And now I'm doing one in virtual reality. And it's about 2.5 years old. And basically it's called Retinad. And our goal for since the inception was to create one of the if you will, the big infrastructures for the whole ecosystem of virtual reality. I'm a big believer in VR myself. And I think it's crucial that we build there are some crucial gears, if you will, to build in this mechanism if we want virtual reality to conquer the world. And if you look at the previous markets like web and mobile, there's a few recurring trends that happened throughout these markets and that I believe need to be replicated for virtual reality to prosper and conquer the world. And some of these things are like monetization, so like ads, payment processors. Then you have hosting, you have a lot of web frameworks, and you also have analytics, which is what we've been trying to build for 2.5 years now. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing this successfully. We've worked with a bunch of big companies like Google, Yahoo, CNN, even the United Nations. And we raised a little in excess of $1.6 million to be able to do this. So that's about it.
Oh, that's pretty incredible. And to the listeners here, I've actually met Sam at a recent conference here in Montreal where he shared quite a bit more of his past history, which is not that long, but it's very, very impressive, the things that you have been able to accomplish so far at your age.
Thank you. Sure.
It's seriously impressive, man. And so the question here, I guess, would be, Retinad, you said it's 2 years old, 2.5 years. You've been able to raise quite a bit of money for the company, and what's even more impressive is the kind of clients that you've been working with on that company. So I guess the first question would be, how did you manage to get those huge accounts, those huge clients to collaborate and to work with you?
Well, honestly, I can't take all the credit. An army is composed of many soldiers, and we've managed to assemble a really, really amazing team. I try to hire people that are smarter than I am, or even more hardworking, and that's kind of my benchmark. And I think we've really accomplished that. We have a very, very excellent team of incredible people. So I'm pretty happy about that, and I think it's part of the reasons why we're able to get these guys. But the other thing is, one of my investors calls me the bomber, because very often what I'll do is whenever I want to get a new customer that I have in mind, I will basically flood that customer's company with emails until they basically answer me. And I will find emails from top VPs, the CEO, everyone, and I'll find a way to get access to the decision makers. It's one of the things I've been doing since I was very young, and it's one of the hacks, if you will, that helped me the most in life. Just directly reaching out to the people that most people think probably are out of reach. Very often you end up being very surprised of how easy it is to talk to these guys. And I've been doing this for a very long while, and it helped me a lot in getting all these big guys. So I would send CNN, for example. I just cold emailed probably like 5 or 6 of their vice presidents until they transferred me to the appropriate person, and we got them as a customer. Same with United Nations. I wasn't responsible at Google nor Yahoo, but anyways, it's something we do a lot, and it just works. Yeah.
That's actually pretty incredible, and I'm sure that could be a podcast episode on its own. how to reach out to decision makers, because this is something that I think everybody should be doing. I'm talking about people who are starting businesses and want some kind of collaboration or help from influencers, from someone really high up there. And the biggest issue that I find is that people are simply scared and intimidated to reach out to those people.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I have friends who I tell all the time to reach out to their idols, and they look at me like I'm a freaking crazy guy, but it's actually the best thing ever to do.
Yeah, and what's interesting that you mentioned that they aren't that hard to find, actually, if you tried hard enough. And there's software like Ninja Outreach and other ways to facilitate that task and to actually help you out find the people you're actually looking for. And as usually I tell people who are scared or who just simply don't have the confidence to do it, I tell them, what's the worst thing that would happen? That person will just say, no, I can't help you, or I don't have time, whatever. They just say no, and you move on to the next one, or you come back to that person 6 months later and reach out again.
And I think it compounds because initially when I have friends of mine who I'll tell all the time to reach out to their idols and everything, and some of them will give me the excuse that I don't have anything to say to these guys, or they'll think they're losing their time with me and everything, and that might be true initially, but what eventually happens is that as you build up a network doing this, you can go to top guys and say, well, I met this guy who's your friend, and he suggested I reach out to you. I do that all the time. I reached out. I won't say the specific name because I don't want to piss off the person, but I reached out to one of my top idols through his brother, and it works super well. It just works, honestly, and I think you don't need a good excuse to do it. You create a story and you go out and you reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome, and that helps a lot. And that's kind of approach that I do for this podcast as well. I have to reach out to influencers and people who can potentially inspire others, and sometimes it does sound impossible, but you're not going to lose anything by trying to reach out to them. The worst case, as I mentioned, they say no, and that's it. You move on. All right, Sam. So let's go back to your company. And since a lot of people listening to this podcast is people who are either starting their own business, mostly online, or who may be just starting to think about a new business they want to do, and they aren't sure what they're going to do, what kind of niche they want to go to, what kind of industry.
Yeah.
And you went into, first of all, VR, virtual reality, which is up and coming. And we can all agree that this is going to be really, really huge. It's already growing super fast, and it's only going to become like a household item. Everybody's going to have virtual reality in their homes and beyond. So that's a really great industry to go into. However, one of the questions would be, how did you come across the idea of getting into that industry? Because as you mentioned before, you worked with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin industry and a few other things. How did you end up going after virtual reality, and why?
It's actually a really funny story. I'm very obsessed by space exploration, and when I was, I think, 19 or 20, I was kind of mad that I couldn't go to Mars. So I tried simulating Mars as close as possible, and sort of just trying to get the environment. And I was looking at a bunch of virtual reality devices from military organizations and stuff like that, and very expensive equipment. And I never bought them because they were too expensive. But then I found this headset that was on Kickstarter called Oculus. and I bought one from Kickstarter, and I just fell in love with it. Honestly, that was the very, very early version. It was almost made like you could almost see like duct tape on there, um, and it was just amazing. I still love that device, even if it's very crappy by today's standards. And I fell in love with it, and I started wondering, like, well, this is probably going to be something very big. What can I do to help this go faster around the market, around the world? And it's for me, virtual reality kind of gets me to. There's something I really like about it, and that I tend to look in when I join a new market. It's the sort of philosophical aspect of that market. So Bitcoin was revolutionizing finance and currency as we know it. Virtual reality is almost revolutionizing human interactions and what actually we perceive as real and fake. Very often now I'll wear a VR device and I'll go back to reality afterwards, and it makes you question like what consists a physical environment to a point. I have my godfather. I made him try a VR device the other day, and he had a coffee in his hands. And in the VR environment which he tried, there was a table in front of him, and he tried putting his coffee on the virtual reality table and ended up spilling all over the floor because that table doesn't exist. And it makes you think, like, to which extent can we push this? Is there a possibility that eventually a large fraction of all humans will end up in VR for a majority of their lives? And I think it's not a good thing, but I think it's entirely possible. And I just want to be in these kinds of markets. I find them extremely interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great story. And Sam, let's keep talking about your company. Another question would be is that, well, I know that you didn't start this company as a virtual reality analytics,
yeah,
but it ended up there. So could you please elaborate a little bit more on that? What the company was started as and what it has become, and mostly why?
Yeah. The goal was always, as I said, to build an infrastructure, but initially it was not analytics. It was our initial bet was on monetization. So we wanted to be the first ad network for virtual reality. It worked with moderate success, but problem with ads is that you need something like 100 million people with the device to actually make any money doing ads. Because the way ads work is that you have CPMs, so cost per mil. It's basically $1,000 is worth 1,000 impressions of an ad is worth about $2-3 on the web. So in virtual reality, when we started, there was probably like 100,000 units on the market. So that in total is about 100 CPMs. So I don't know, but getting like $200-300 is not that appealing for a VC funded business. So we ended up shifting to analytics, which we had built on the side and worked very well. And that bet has been our greatest decision so far in the company's history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And this is something that analytics, there have been a lot of companies that build really, really huge successes on just providing that analytics.
Right, absolutely. If you look at mobile, there's probably like $4 or $5 billion companies just doing analytics. So yeah.
There's one that if there was a way to do it that could also have a huge potential, that would be what we're doing right now, analytics for podcasts. The problem is that it's pretty much impossible to do at this moment. One of the reasons being that iTunes, one of the biggest podcasting platforms, right? They don't reveal the numbers of subscribers to anyone. They just don't give them out. Many other platforms do the same. Another issue that they have found with podcasts is, let's say, when somebody downloads your episode on their device, there's no way to measure what they do with that episode. Do they listen to it once, twice, 3 times? Do they not listen to it at all? Do they copy that from their computer and then give it out to their friends by, a USB key or something? So it's like really hard to track. And I know all these podcasters are like struggling to figure out a way to get good proper analytics for their content.
That's actually a brilliant idea. I'm surprised that doesn't exist, but it's definitely something that should exist.
Yeah.
It's not not crazy pie in the sky idea.
Yeah, because that was actually last night. I was thinking of this interview we're doing today, and I thought of you doing analytics for VR, and I'm like, hey, how come there is no such a thing for podcasts, like a proper thing? And it got me thinking.
We have a business.
All I have to do is persuade Apple to give out their stats.
Well, there's probably a way to track it outside of Apple, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. All right, Sam. So, could you share the beginnings of Retinad VR? How did the actual company came to life, and how did you start getting people's attention to that company in order to grow it, in order to get your first clients, in order to get the word out?
I guess that's a very long and complicated answer because it has many different parts. But initially, I always try to start my companies as sort of I really like the scientific mind frame. Mm-hmm. And I think doing companies as experiments until proven valid, experiments with hypothesis, you set out an hypothesis and you do an experiment and you see if the market reacts appropriately to your product. And I think that's probably the best way to do that. So in terms of Retinad, it started with an MVP, minimum viable product, that we launched. It worked pretty damn well. And then afterwards we went on to try to get funding for it and to scale it. And that's pretty much the way I always do things. And it works super well because you prove your stuff first. And if it works, well, then you just scale with money, or you improve the product. But that getting product market fit is another science by itself. But that's pretty much the solution. And in terms of, in the case of Retinad, that was it initially. Now, we were lucky to get some traction out of nowhere when we started out. But then afterwards, we had to sort of push the product as much as we could. Because even if it was free earlier, well, people would not download it all the time. It didn't. The first few versions didn't add that much value. So it's always a cycle of creating a better product and pushing it into as many users' hands as possible. So yeah, mm-hmm. It's a very simplified answer, but it's kind of giving you a little bit of how it works.
Mm-hmm. And Sam, what do you think are the chances of someone starting a company without really much investment because they simply don't have that much money, but whatever company, let's say they have a coder or a programmer that could help them out, they kind of know their way around marketing, but they don't have much capital and they don't want to seek investors, or they have no clue how to do that. What is the chance of this kind of company actually succeeding, provided that their product is actually great and is in demand?
Honestly, I don't want to sound rude, but I think that's a fake excuse. Because if tomorrow I came to you and I said, like, you need $10,000 to get a heart transplant or something like that, something vital, mm-hmm. Anyone probably in a decent socioeconomic society like Canada or the United States would find a way to obtain that money. There's always a way. And I think starting a company, if you don't have that mentality of do or do, like life or death almost, it's not going to work out, because starting a company is extremely hard. So I think you really need to have this sort of mentality that you will do anything it takes to get investment if your product you believe in your product. And so I don't think that's true. And even if it was true, honestly, starting a company is not that expensive. What is expensive is scaling it out. But one of my biggest mentors started a company, which unfortunately I cannot name the name, but he started a company that pretty much 30 or 40% of the planet uses on a daily basis. And the guy did it with no outside investment ever. He just bootstrapped the whole thing. He paid everything himself initially, and he kept on paying everything himself from revenues. Mm-hmm. So if he can do it, like anyone can do it. I really don't think that's a suitable excuse. The lack of money is never an excuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice, I guess. I'm not sure if I agree with you 100%, but I guess I agree with the fact that in order to scale it, you need money, especially if you want to scale it big and fast.
Right. But I mean, it always depends. But Retinad, for example, was started by my co-founder and I with probably like $10,000 out of our own pockets, so 5,000 each. It's a good amount, but it's not a crazy amount that no one has. It's something that's easily at hand. And I think if as soon as you get traction, then you either put more of your money in if you have more, or you get investors. So there's always a way to do it.
Yeah, totally. Okay, Sam, so I have another question here. So you started Retinad, as you just explained. You had a personal experience and you really loved what VR offers and the opportunities that are coming up.
Yeah.
So in a way, we could say that you kind of followed your passion for this specific company.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a sane and good advice in general to start a business by following your passion? Because I've heard a lot of people, a lot of successful entrepreneurs, and some of them say that this is the stupidest idea ever. You should follow the money and not your passion. And some others say, well, it'll be extremely hard to make money if you're doing something that you're not passionate about. So which part of this advice, in your opinion, is more proper?
I fall somewhere in between the two. I think you need to have a lot of passion. I think you need to have passion, but you don't need necessarily to be passionate in the thing you're building. A best example of this is I love VR, but I don't like analytics. I like it, but I don't live or die for analytics itself.
Yeah,
I actually find the model to be very basic. So it doesn't have that. It's more for VR than I'm here than analytics. But I think I'm a capitalist by every definition, and I think if you're passionate about, I wouldn't say I'm passionate about money, but I would say I'm passionate about creating large organizations that generate profit. And I think if that's also a passion, you can probably do that in any industry, even if the industry is super boring. If your passion is simply business, it applies on anything. And if your supreme goal in building a company is making money, you'll probably be passionate by that as well. But and in my mind, honestly, I just tried always to do the two at the same time. Be in a sector that I'm passionate about, plus something where I can actually make great profits. And I think I've always managed to find industries in which that was possible, and I think that's the best mixture of the two, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great advice. And I guess I agree with you on that one, because I often get this question from people, from readers of my blog or podcast listeners, and they always ask me about that as well. And I tell them, honestly, I would suggest following your passion simply because it's so much easier to create content around the subject that you love and enjoy.
Yeah.
And it's just easier to get into it. However, if your passion is painting your backyard fence, like how many people are interested in that subject, and how many clients could you potentially reach with that? Maybe your niche or your passion is way too small and way too not profitable in some cases, that you really have to judge on that as well. It's great to have a passion and work with it, but sometimes the passion is just not profitable, and you have to face that from time to time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. I think there's always probably something you can find that's also profitable and that creates passion. I'm sure most people have somewhere where the two intersect. The only thing I would say, the only caveat is when you're starting a company based around a product, if you're not someone who would actively use that product, even if it's a market that doesn't passionate you, I think you need to be someone who would be a user of that product. A good example of this is I do not like the telecom market by any sense, any stretch of the imagination. I find it pretty boring, but I am a telecom user, and that industry happens to have a lot of money in there. So would I consider creating a telecom company because I know what I'm looking for in a telecom service, and I'm after the profits of that industry. Totally, absolutely. But I think you need to understand the product you're building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Of course, that's very important, regardless if it's a SaaS or a physical product or
Yeah.
service of any sort. And Sam, what's interesting here that you've mentioned a bit earlier in this podcast that you're not really the analytics guy or whatever. You're more of a marketing guy. You're the brains behind the operation. So what you end up doing is hiring people to do certain tasks, and you look for people who are great at those tasks. Let's say building that analytics platform for VR. Maybe you could share some advice on how you find the talents for those tasks that you hire for your company.
It depends for each role, of course, but my chief indicator that I want to hire someone is sort of honestly just like being extremely hard-headed. It sucks sometimes to deal with these kinds of people because they're, again, extremely hard-headed. But I think honestly, if you're just super perseverant, and that whenever you have an obstacle in your way, you just go at it until it breaks, until you can get over whatever challenge. I think you will triumph over initially very bad odds that you would succeed. I think that's actually also the defining factors for entrepreneurs. So not just employees. I think entrepreneurs will probably, like career entrepreneurs, will probably fail 4 times on 10 or something like that. And it's just part of the game. The ones that win are the ones that don't mind these failures and just keep on going. And the same is true for employees. So if you want to hire someone, and I do that all the time. Whenever I hire someone, I ask them, would your best friend tell me you're hard-headed? And if yes, give me an example of hard-headed, of how hard-headed you are. Like a crazy example of something you did that proves me how crazy unstoppable you are. One of my examples is I had a relationship in the past that probably failed because I was so adamant on staying with that person that eventually it killed the relationship itself because I tried crossing every single obstacle, and it kind of the other person found it a little bit weird. But I think it's just the entrepreneur mentality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And since you're going into that whole entrepreneur mentality and stuff, once again, a lot of people ask, what does it take to become an entrepreneur? Some people say that, I wish I could do something on my own, but I've never gone to the business school, or I never even, finished university, or I'm too young, so I don't have any experience. What's your take on that?
I think that those are also excuses. I think a real entrepreneur will be so passionate or will have this energy so much in him that he wants to start. A real entrepreneur, I will say this, a real entrepreneur will start companies accidentally because he just likes building companies so much. And I've seen this in all of my good friends that are really good entrepreneurs. These guys, they don't even do it on purpose, but they find market opportunities and will accidentally start companies. I think someone who always finds excuses is perhaps not the best fit for an entrepreneur, because you really need to be able, honestly, to give your life to what you're building. It is what it requires. It requires you to be nonstop on your phone making things work. It requires you to bleed yourself to death, an analogy, of course, to make sure everything works well. It's kind of, honestly, I think it might have a little sort of, I'm not sure very successful entrepreneurs are perfectly mentally balanced, to be honest with you, because the things it takes to succeed in business are often like traits of extremely high competitiveness. And yeah, it really takes you some extreme, and you'll go through very bad hardships. So you need to be able to withstand a lot of mental pain. You need to be able to just shut down your brain and keep on going, even if everything sucks. Churchill, I'm a big fan of Churchill, and he once said, "When you go through hell, just keep on going." And I think that's like it applies perfectly to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, great advice, and I agree on a lot of that. And when I was looking at a lot of successful entrepreneurs and things like that, I came with the conclusion that you kind of have to be obsessed in order to succeed and actually see the results you want to see. If you're not obsessed, if you're just like doing it for the fun and chances are you're not going to go that far, because as soon as you get uncomfortable with something, as soon as you have to sacrifice, let's say, part of your life, let's say just going out on Thursdays because Thursdays you get cheap drinks at a bar.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I could get some work done. I could write a blog article this Thursday evening, but all my friends are going to the bar, so screw that. I'm just going to join them. And that's when it kind of goes downhill, I think, especially for beginner entrepreneurs.
A good way of looking at this is the good way of looking at this is simply, if you take the decision to not work during these hours, your competitor might take the decision to work during these hours, and he will have a degree of advance on you, and you're screwed. If you work twice as hard as your competitor, you will achieve twice as much, or possibly less, because it compounds. So I think it's kind of simplifying it, but I think it kind of goes down to these kinds of things. You can cheat a little bit, but in the end, like, there's nothing that beats pure. I hate that term, but hustle. Yeah.
It is what it is, yeah. And when I first started learning about affiliate marketing, because that's what I do mostly in 2007, what I think differentiated my experience from many other people, beginners who are starting, I was also starting from complete zero. I didn't know what WordPress is or how to set up a blog, or I had no clue about marketing, any of that sort, right?
Yeah.
But I found this program that was kind of like affiliate marketing training, and they would teach you everything from setting up a blog to marketing to everything, blah, blah, blah. And the very first thing that I did, I loved the idea of affiliate marketing, and I got so obsessed with it that the very first time that I logged into the training, I think I spent 35 to 40 hours awake just going through training and taking action right away. So I read or watched a video on how to set up a blog.
Yeah.
I stopped watching. I set up a blog right away. Next point, like, okay, you have to make content for your blog. This is how you write an article. I'm like, okay, pause. Let me write an article. And I spent like 40 hours straight just, working at it. And now I notice people that reach out to me and they tell me, Alex, I need your help. I don't understand what's going on. I've spent last 12 months, 15 months, 20 months learning everything there is to learn about, let's say, once again, affiliate marketing or any kind of online marketing. Yeah. And I don't see any results. I'm not sure where to start. And I tell them, well, that's where you failed. You should have started 20 months ago. When you started a training or learning something, you take action. Don't just, sit around and analyze. And as you mentioned, while you're doing that, while you're not taking that action, while you're not getting work done, your competitors are. And they're taking up the space and the revenue that you could be taking.
Absolutely. I think there are kind of two kinds of people in life. I don't want to simplify it that much, but I think it's not so far from the truth. There are two kinds of people. There are the ones who talk, and there are the ones who do. And I think you can very easily find. I think in a few minutes of conversation, often you can decipher what someone is. There's just really, I don't think anyone who just talks can achieve anything in entrepreneurship, because it just takes so much hard work. Like you just said, your blog example was perfect. It's very often you'll achieve incredible results in very, very prolonged hours of just getting your head down and working. And I think that can't be replaced by anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. All right, Sam. So you've done a lot of different things as an entrepreneur, and a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when we see the stories online, it's all about success, how big of wealth they achieved, how amazing the life is, and how amazing the journey was. However, a lot of people forget to mention that this amazing journey has a lot of black parts and this negative parts where many entrepreneurs, or let's say many normal people, would just give up and go get a job instead because, oh my God, this problem is so huge, or what just happened to me is so incredibly bad that entrepreneurship is not for me. I should just, go get a job and stick with that for the rest of my life. Have you had, I'm sure you've had like negative moments, but can you maybe share one of the biggest drawbacks or roadblocks that you have had in your entrepreneurial career that kind of made you question everything?
Yeah, I actually have a perfect example of this. When I was 18, I founded the first Bitcoin debit card, and we ended up doing it with. It ended up merging with Mt. Gox, which was the biggest Bitcoin exchange and company at the time, a Japanese company, and they put about close to $1 million into my project. And after about 2 years of building it with them, at one point in, was it like probably February 2014, they got hacked and they lost $500 million in customer deposits.
Wow.
Yeah. And it some of my money, even my parents' money, there was some of my parents' money in there as well. And it really sucked. It really, really sucked. And now like the American authorities, the American financial authorities were at our doorstep and knocking on every single part of the company, including us. We had a bunch of negative press. We were working with MasterCard, and then they cut the relationship and wouldn't touch us with a 10-foot pole. Like a really, really bad week. March 2014 was, in all respects, the most horrible month of my life, by far. It's very few times in your life will you actually contemplate really the possibility of just like stopping to exist, to put it in very nice terms.
Wow.
Yeah, and it really sucked. And after that happened, for like 2 weeks, it was complete hell. And the company died completely in 72 hours or something like that. Like literally $500 million worth of money was gone. So it killed everything. And that really sucked. But I remember very vividly a conversation I had with someone I was working at that time, who was part of my project. And he told me like, well, what's next? What are you going to do after this? And I was like 19 at the time. And he told me like, oh, I think entrepreneurship is like super weird. I'm going to get a job or something. You're going to do the same, right? And I remember very vividly saying something like, no, it sucks, but at some point it will work. And I founded another company in social media like a week after that ended up doing okay, but it wasn't incredible. But yeah, so that was like by far my most horrible experience in my life so far.
Wow, that's crazy, man. Thanks for sharing that story. And
My pleasure.
honestly, I don't know many people who would have recovered and went on with entrepreneurship after experience like that. It's hard to imagine even.
Like I said, it's possibly a mental disease, right? So it's
it's an obsession.
Yeah.
It's a way of life. All right, Sam. Yeah, so once again, thank you for sharing that. And as we're approaching the end of this episode, I'd like you to share maybe the most important advice that you could give out to either beginner entrepreneurs or someone who's just thinking of going on their own. What would be the most important thing that they should pay attention to?
Well, it's a recurring trend through our conversation, but I think just like honestly, never giving up. It's crazy, but at some point, if you have a good enough brain, if you work in, of course, there are like basic conditions that need to be applied for you to succeed. You need to be in a good society, good education at least, and some things like that. But if you have these things, just never, ever, ever giving up. At some point, the probabilities will be in your favor, and it will work out. And it always ends up working. If you knock on a door, at some point the door will open. It's just it'll break. And that's first, and second, I would say try to. I don't know how I do it, but try to sort of shut her down or simply don't acknowledge mental pain, because you'll go through a lot of it. I think if you find a way to simply you always be able to see sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, and ignore the current pain that you're going through, you'll fare much better in most business situations. If you're able to do that, you can just go through very bad times. And I think in some regards, you need to live a little bit in the future to be able to do that, because otherwise, very often the current moment can suck really, really badly. So yeah, basically ignoring pain and never giving up. I'd say those are really the two key things.
All right, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. Highly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Sam, before you go, if people want to find out more about you or maybe even your company, where should they go?
On Google, maybe retinad.io. But yeah, I guess if they Google me, I don't know what comes out, but I guess there's probably things on there. So yeah.
So it's retinad.io, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. All right, Sam, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your sharing your experience, your advice, and your tips. And thank you for being on the show.
No, well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Extra Paycheck Podcast. As usual, I will be putting up a show notes page at extrapodcast.com/89. This is where I will be sharing resources, links, and other things mentioned in today's episode. Also, head over to extrapodcast.com/iTunes in order to subscribe to this show through iTunes. Also, leave a rating and a review, which will help this show tremendously. Thank you so much once again for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next Monday.